Good morning and welcome to The Point, local reaction to the January 6th hearings today. Millions of Americans tuned in to televised coverage this past week. Millions more did not. Many Republicans calling the hearing a witch hunt. Democrats call it a necessary look at a threat to American democracy orchestrated, they argued, by then President Donald Trump to overturn a presidential election. We hear from a Republican Party chairman in our community, Michael Barnett, but first, two local members of Congress, both sides of the aisle, both were there on that January 6th day. Democratic Congressman Ted Deutch, District 22, representing parts of Palm Beach and Broward counties. Deutch says we must learn and act on the lessons of January 6th.
This is not a partisan moment. This is a moment where it's important for us to think about just how challenged our democracy was on January 6th, how fragile our democracy is. And we're going to hear from our important to point out, bipartisan January 6th committee that has spent close to a year conducting interviews, doing research with a nonpartisan staff, reviewing thousands and thousands of pages of documents, all with the important task of laying out for the American people exactly what happened leading up to, on that day, and exactly what the goal was behind those who committed that horrific act of insurrection against the democracy that we're so privileged to live in.
Former President Trump, then President Trump, impeached over the events of January 6th. Republicans argue we've been there, done that. At the end of the day, do you believe that once again Americans will see proof that in your judgment he was directly culpable for those events? And what about those who say this is just a do-over?
Well, I'm not sure what the conclusion is going to be, but I don't understand. I'm puzzled, frankly, by anyone who would suggest that we don't have an obligation to lay out clearly everything that happened that day, particularly those of us who were in the Capitol, who were threatened firsthand by these insurrectionists. So I don't know what the conclusion is going to be, but I do know that the January 6th committee is, in a bipartisan way, is going to lay out a very clear story about what happened that day, about the great risk that our democracy faced, with the goal that we should all share, frankly, of making sure that we do everything that we have to and everything that we can do to protect our democracy and the peaceful transfer of power so that it's never challenged the way that it was that day and night again.
Congressman Deutch, the president, now former president's supporters have said it's a witch hunt. It's a do-over. It's a distraction from issues they say that Americans really care about, namely their pocketbooks. It's just another effort they offer or suggest to go after the now former president. Your response to that critique?
I have to acknowledge it's puzzling and it is sad that anyone would call the effort to understand exactly what happened a witch hunt. I mean, this is something that played out in front of all of our eyes. This is something, as we've talked about, my experience on January 6th, and the fear that I and people watching and reaching out to me felt all throughout Palm Beach County and throughout Florida and throughout the country. We've learned bits and pieces here and there since then, but I have no idea why anyone would object to getting to the bottom of exactly what happened unless they're worried about where the accountability is ultimately going to lie. And that's really what this is about, is making sure that we understand what happened and that there's full accountability. We've already seen a massive number of indictments, but it's important that we have accountability. It's important that there's justice, and it's important that we do everything we can to strengthen our democracy coming out of this. And by the way, the other suggestion that you just made, that some are making, is frankly offensive. And the fact that some of my colleagues suggest we're not doing anything about the important issues in this country, when yesterday, they stood on the House floor and said that there is no reason for the United States House of Representatives to take action to stop the scourge of gun violence. That's outrageous. You cannot simultaneously say we're not doing anything important and then try to block the most important thing that we've done, which was passing that bipartisan legislation.
A note, I sought a similar, longer interview with local Republican Congressman Brian Mast from District 18, covering Martin, St. Lucie, and parts of Palm Beach County. He was unavailable for that, but we did catch up to him when he got back into the district late in the week. And here is what he had to say to our news crew about the questioning and about the hearing from lawmakers.
I think it was an absolute sham show. I think Americans got home from work after putting a Benjamin into their gas tank, probably going to Publix or Winn-Dixie earlier in the week and dropping $3 or $4 Benjamins, $300 or $400 to feed their family because of the prices at the grocery store as well. They turn on the TV and Washington is doing nothing to work on the fact that gas prices and grocery prices, as two of the most important things, are through the roof, and they're doing a paid political advertisement by ABC and CBS over questions that they should have asked before they ever did an impeachment hearing.
I also spoke with Michael Barnett, chairman of the Republican Party of Palm Beach County. He argued Americans care about their economic pain, not another, quote, farce led by Democrats in Washington.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm with the millions of Americans who believe that it is not pivotal. I will not be tuning in. I won't be wasting my time. I have other things that are much more important. But I do think Americans should remember where they were and what they were doing on January 6th, 2021. They were actually paying $2.38 a gallon for gas, which is half the national average for a gallon of gas today. That's what people are mostly concerned about, how this economy, how Joe Biden's economy is hurting them in their pocketbooks and making it difficult to take care of their families. They don't care about this farce that's taking place in Washington. It's ridiculous that we have an impeachment of a president based on almost no evidence, and then a year and a half later, they want to conduct an investigation. That's kind of like shooting first and asking questions later. And I think it's nothing more than the Democrats' painfully obvious ploy to distract from the coming crushing electoral defeat in November based on Joe Biden's terrible economy, his unpopularity, and the fact that Americans are sick and tired of it.
Mr. Barnett, Democrats will argue that's straight out of the Republican messaging playbook preceding and during this hearing. And some would argue, and you're certainly a respected, highly respected political voice in the community, would say your comment, at least your critics, cavalier. Here's what Mitch McConnell said about what you dismissed a day or so after the assault on the Capitol. Quote, "There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of that day. The people who stormed the building believed they were acting on the wishes and instruction of their president, and having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth." Hardly seems something that's not worth our attention.
Mitch McConnell is a respected leader in Washington. However, among the grassroots, I don't know one single Republican or average citizen who really cares what he has to say. People are seriously hurting in this economy. I think they're going to be paying more attention to what's going on with the championship finals, how they're going to find baby formula. Personally, I have family who are still looking for baby formula on the shelves. Have you ever even heard of a baby formula shortage? It's ridiculous. Rhetoric aside, talking points aside, this is not something that concerns me or anyone I know. I don't know anyone's going to be tuning into this farce of a hearing. It's ridiculous. And we're going to be focusing as Republicans on getting Republicans elected in November and participating in a major electoral victory for our side.
Now for our roundtable with our News Channel 5 political analyst, Brian Crowley. Your thoughts?
Well, Congressman Mast and Mr. Barnett, they talk about the economy, and they're right. People care very deeply about gas prices, grocery prices, inflation is hitting record highs, and people every day drive to the gas pump, go to the grocery store, and they care deeply about those issues. None of that has anything to do with January 6th. So to dismiss January 6th just because of inflation seems like a waste of time. It's a great talking point for the Republicans, I guess, but You know, Liz Cheney is a Republican. Her father was Vice President of the United States. She's a very devout Republican who agrees with Republicans on 99% of the issues and was highly rated as a Republican conservative. She feels strongly about what happened on January 6th because, in her view, she's being patriotic and looking out for the future of the country. You can do that, and I'll bet that Liz Cheney is equally concerned with Congressman Mast and Michael Barnett about inflation and gas prices. People in Palm Beach County, people in the Treasure Coast are getting hammered by those issues. And sure, it's a great talking point.
What about the larger issue about election integrity? We're focused on what happened in the lead up and after the presidential election, but as we look at Florida elections, we look at this battleground state, there's the ongoing question about election integrity. There's been a push, even though the election in Florida was lauded as very well run in 2020, to tighten up in the minds of Republicans, suppress in the minds of Democrats, voters in Florida. But your sense of the issue that we have to look at growing out of this and how it affects us here in Florida and beyond?
Well, I think that, you know, we can go back and we can look at the 2000 election, and Palm Beach County was the focal point of what went wrong in the 2000 election with the hanging chads and the messed up ballots. And then you wind up with over 30 days of Al Gore and George Bush fighting over who won Florida. When all was said and done, it went through the courts, it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Democrats didn't agree with the decision. Nobody was raiding the Capitol. My concern now is if we don't address what happened on January 6th, if the loser in the November election for governor or for U.S. Senate disagrees, are we going to accept the court system or are we going to have a raid on the state capitol? I mean, we have systems in place to fix the things we disagree about, and then the loser has to graciously step aside, and that's what we need to go back to.
Bluntly speaking, you've been a long-time observer of the political scene. You talk to people everywhere. How worried are you that we're imperiling our election process, whichever side of the aisle you're on, and what that means for us in the long term? Bottom line.
Oh, I'm deeply worried. Our system always worked because we had faith in the courts, we had faith in elected officials, an imperfect system, but that ultimately would decide things, the voters would accept it, and we would move on. For the first time, we've had a former president who refused to concede the election, still hasn't conceded the election. It has enraged his supporters. And what does that mean for future elections? Do we no longer concede? Do we no longer accept the results? That's very dangerous.
30 seconds left in this segment. And again, we all look at the videos, we all look at the testimony, and depending on your political prism, we all come to different conclusions in America these days. It's hard to find any common ground on either side.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, on the day it happened, many of the people who were fleeing to the hidden basement areas that the security and the Secret Service were moving people to were the Republicans. Republican members of Congress, Republican members of the Senate, and the Vice President of the United States were being protected from the mob. And that should never happen in this country.
Brian, we'll continue on the other side as we move on to other topics of note in our state right now. Up next, the gun reform debate and action in Florida.